They could lose as much as 3/4 of their usual business from young Americans who take spring breaks here. The U.S. government has warned its citizens to avoid travel to 18 Mexican states, including Guerrero, where Acapulco is located. To counter these warnings, tourism authorities here launched a campaign called Speak Well About Acapulco.
I feel that unfortunately what happened here has been magnified. I'm not saying things don't happen, but things happen everywhere in the world.
Acapulco is still a magnet for Mexican tourists. Despite the risks these days, hotels, restaurants and nightclubs are packed on weekends. The increase in violence comes as turf battles between drug cartels intensify, each battling for control of the area. For the most part, violent incidents happen here in poor suburbs. But in the latest confrontation among drug gangs where 18 people were killed, it happened right here. There's a lot of traffic and a lot of commerce. The proximity to this area is a signal that the violence is spreading randomly to places where anyone could now be surprised in the crossfire. Mariana Sanchez, AlJazeera, Acapulco, Mexico.
And you can follow all of those stories by logging onto our website at www.aljazeera.net/English. Of course, we are continuing to follow the ongoing events in Libya and the international fallout of what's going on and how they are reacting to the uprising in the country. More on that in a little while. I'm Sahil Rahman and this is Al Jazeera. These are the stories making the headlines. The United States President has spoken out about the Libyan crisis for the first time. Barack Obama has condemned violence in Libya, calling it outrageous and unacceptable. Obama said the Libyan government must be held responsible for failing to respect the rights of its people.
Like all governments, the Libyan government has a responsibility to refrain from violence, to allow humanitarian assistance to reach those in need, and to respect the rights of its people. It must be held accountable for its failure to meet those responsibilities and face the cost of continued violations of human rights.
There are reports the first western city of Misrata is under the control of protesters. According to a witness, 6 people were killed and 200 injured in the city, which lies about 120 kilometers east of the capital, Tripoli. Well, earlier, Libyan state television aired a short speech by Gaddafi's daughter Aisha, refuting reports that she'd left the country.
I would like to tell the Libyan people that I'm as steadfast as this house I stand in front of. And this shows to the Libyan people the amount of lies, fabrications and false news these channels are spreading.
3,000 Turkish citizens have returned home after escaping the violence in Libya. They arrived at the Mediterranean port of Marmaris on 2 ships sent by the country to evacuate them. At least 5,000 Turks have now left Libya, of about 25,000 that are in the country. More than 200 Turkish companies are involved in construction projects in Libya. Rescue efforts are continuing in New Zealand, where hundreds of people are still missing following Tuesday's earthquake in Christchurch. But hopes of finding any more survivors are fading. 7 people have been injured during clashes in the Greek capital, Athens. During the demonstration, a policeman was set alight. The video shows other officers rushing to his aid as he tried to put out the fire. The clashes took place as tens of thousands of people protested against austerity measures. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has promised $10.7 billion in pay rises, job creation and leniency on loans. He made the announcement as he returned home after spending 3 months abroad for medical treatment. The new development fund is being set up to help struggling Saudis buy homes, get married and start businesses. Those were the headlines. More news at the top of the hour. Do stay with us because Riz Khan is next.
Hello and welcome. Seen as a threat to many Arab regimes, artists and intellectuals were often repressed. So what role can they play now as the landscape changes through popular uprisings? Many of those challenging their long-standing authoritarian regimes say they've been inspired by the literature of protest through the years. From Latin America to the Arab world, writers and thinkers have faced persecution and even death for daring to speak out against totalitarian rule, but their persistence has served as an example for those seeking change. So today we ask, what is the political power of literature and what role do writers and artists have in social revolutions? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me now from London is Libyan writer Hisham Matar, who spent his early childhood in Tripoli until his family were forced to flee the Gaddafi regime. In 1990, his father, a political dissident, was kidnapped in Cairo and remains missing to this day. His book, In the Country of Men, tells the story of Colonel Gaddafi's 1969 September Revolution through the eyes of a 9-year-old boy. Also with us is internationally acclaimed Egyptian writer Ahdaf Soueif. She has recently returned to London after participating in the Tahrir Square protests in Egypt. Her book, The Map of Love, traces modern Egyptian history. And from Durham in North Carolina, we're joined by the world-renowned Chilean writer Ariel Dorfman. In the 1960s, he took part in the social revolutions that swept Latin America, and he worked as a cultural advisor to Chilean President Salvador Allende. Professor Dorfman was forced into exile during the authoritarian Pinochet regime. And his play, Death and the Maiden, about torture and disappearance, has been staged around the world. I thank you all for being on the show. And Hisham Matar, actually, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and ask, considering how the Gaddafi regime has affected your family, how do you regard what's going on in Libya and what might really change there when it comes to the social landscape?
Well, what's going on in Libya right now is extraordinary because the Libyan dictatorship has been exceptionally violent and oppressive. Cultural life in Libya under Gaddafi has been all but decimated. And obviously, witnessing this uprising, I'm more concerned right now with the loss of life and with the vulnerability that Libyan society finds itself in. But also, I'm also excited, if that's the right word, about the future, hopeful about the future.
Let me ask you, do you feel...
It seems that...
Yeah, do you feel that there will really be a change in the way people can express themselves? Do you really feel... I mean, no one really knows what's going to happen next. Do you feel there will be greater freedom of expression?
Well, I think so, because I think the most significant thing that has happened in these last few weeks, not only in Libya, obviously, but also in Tunisia and in Egypt, hasn't been what people have focused on, which is the toppling of, long-standing, incredibly violent, oppressive dictatorships, although that's, of course, an incredibly significant event. I think what has been more significant is that I get the sense that people in Tunisia and in Egypt and now in Libya are rediscovering what it means to be a people. They're rediscovering their national identity, the sense of themselves. Certain kind of, regaining of a sort of pride and, a sense of what it means to live in a metropolis. And so I think inevitably that's going to make cultural life more vibrant and more rich.
Let me bring in Ahdaf Soueif and ask, when you were in Egypt recently and you were there taking part in the protest in Tahrir Square against the Egyptian President Mubarak's regime, what sense did you get of what people